kechi pardu ne kautam chetu. Rese kyamne lama kele me tukje chingi dala siksu so gongyab drewe nyamda dachala chitsunla me tuje rabgongne. Kodan sungi nawa drame tu nyamsu nyongwe kesan topra sho kewa kundu yanda lama dan rame chekipe la longche chin. Sadan lamge yunten rabzone dorje change koba nyur tobe sho. Pakyuke kudan dagi lu, pakyuke sundan dagi nga, pakyuke tukdan dagi yin, tenyer me chiktu chingi lu, makyuke kudan dagi lu, makyuke sundan dagi nga. Tudan dagi ye, tenyer me chiktu jinge lo. Om muni muni maha muni shakya muni swaha. Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi chinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye druparash. Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi chinso gibe sonam drola pinchra sangye druparasho. Sangye chodan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye druparasho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good evening. Sometimes it can happen to us. We could meet someone in a context that's different from the one we are used to, and not just the place and the situation, but also with different people, you know. And maybe it happens and we think that this is not the same person. For example, if we see two people who are always together, a couple, for example, and we relate with that person always with that other person, and then at a certain point we relate to that person alone. It's different, isn't it? Is it different because that person is being fake in that moment? No. Simply because no one exists in the present moment independently from his own interactions. And we get back once again to that basic rule that wherever there's interaction, inevitably there's transformation. So what I am now it exists it depends on you. Depends on your being here. The place that where I am, the air that we're breathing, and an infinite number of things of which we're unaware. Each one of us in this present moment, we are what we are, based on an enormous quantity of things. I exist. I exist today as I am, in dependency on you. And you also exist based on this dependency, this relation with me. I mean, this concept of interdependence. Interdependence means that there's a reciprocal dependence. One doesn't exist without the other, and vice versa. They're two different entities, yes, but one doesn't exist without the other, and vice versa. They are totally dependent upon each other to exist. And this brings us a reflection. And we could spend hours and many aspects, but I was thinking about last week. The roles that are roles in lifetime. In my specific case, a lama that transmits teachings or guides spiritually, etc. This role, what I do, can't exist without those those who want to be guided, etc. Like a doctor is not a doctor without patients. It depends on what the function of a doctor is. No? Today, the function of a doctor is to heal sicknesses. This was explained to me that about 3,000 years ago in China, the function of a doctor wasn't about healing sicknesses, but was about maintaining good health, and people paid a kind of insurance or a kind of salary, call it what you want. They would pay the doctor monthly when they were healthy, and if they were sick, they wouldn't pay him anything. So the doctors, a family doctor, for example, like today, there are family doctors. At the time, there were these family doctors who had a certain number of people that he would take care of. And before summertime, the doctor would come would make rounds at the family and would tell them, you should eat this, you should avoid eating this, and this is the kind of behavior, this is the kind of behavior that you should do to maintain your health. Otherwise, they wouldn't pay him. And if people nobody wants to get sick. If you wanted to save a little bit of money, maybe you would get a little sick. And the function of the doctor was not to heal sicknesses, that too, but was mostly to maintain a state of good health. I mean, that state of good health, does that come automatically? No, it needs to be, energy is necessary. It needs to be taken care of. A physical state of health and also mental state of health, and also the state of health of the environment. And also socially, it's not something that just happens like that we can take for granted. It's something to keep it, to sustain it. It requires an enormous amount of energy that is with awareness. Here too, what's the function? I mean, how does one see oneself in relation to others? And this changes the way we interact, changes the function. As a doctor, my function is to cure sickness. I relate in function based on your sickness, and you relate to me also through your sickness. So that meeting point is sickness. If the function of a doctor is to sustain health, good health, at that point I go to the doctor to talk about my good health, not to talk about my sickness. If a doctor came to us today and said, you should eat this and stop, and don't do this, and I would say, well, I'm healthy, why why is he telling me this? Because we don't think that this is part of the function of a doctor. But this relationship creates, so for me to be something, I need to interact with someone that makes me what I am. It's an exchange. I've seen within the Buddhist tradition situations where people are very, very well prepared with a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge that theoretically, and I say theoretically in the sense that the job that was given to them as a spiritual guide, but they didn't have anyone to guide. This is, in my opinion, is not a small problem in the world of Tibetan Buddhism, because in Tibet, each village, big, small village, there was the Lama resident, let's say, the spiritual guide, the doctor often, the friend, the counselor, it had many, many functions. And when this Lama when he would die, his reincarnation would then go to the great monasteries in the central part of Tibet, and then he would go back to his place of origin, where the villagers would wait for him to be guided and supported. What happened is that many, many lamas, very young, they went to India, where they studied very, very well, etc. Some highly learned, some less so. But once the studies are done, they don't they can spend many years, even decades, without a specific function, because they can't go back to Tibet or to teach. And I've seen that I've learned so much more teaching than actually learning. So I have deep gratitude towards you. Not only you who are here today, but all of you who've allowed me to deepen certain things, to give meaning to my life in this direction. Someone might say, Lama, no, it's you're the one who did, you took this direction. But no, it's reciprocal, and it's really beautiful to be able to recognize this reciprocity. That when we interact with someone, and for better or worse, when we have a healthy relationship, or when our relationship is not healthy, at the end of the day, in Portuguese we say, if one doesn't want to, two people don't fight. And so even when there's conflict, one could say, oh, he started it. But the other one answered, that upheld his point of view. So what happens is, reality in any condition is not independent, autonomous. Everything exists on the basis of the relationship the relationships that are created. And so I'd like to observe also myself. I can philosophize and looking at others doesn't mean much. We need to look at ourselves. Each one of us in our lives, we have relationships. We have this tendency to see each person and his function, his role, and as if he existed independently. And the master is the master, the student is the student, the doctor is the doctor, the patient is the patient, etc., etc. Am I wrong? We have this tendency to look like this. When we look at our own lives, there's a father, those who are, brothers or grandparents, and that relationship doesn't exist without the others with whom they interact. And someone could come and ask, well, what am I? The example that we gave at the beginning, I see you in a context with a certain person, and you act in a certain way, you show certain traits. And then I see you in another context, and you're a different person. So who are you? I don't know if you've ever seen someone in a different context and they seemed fake. Well, look, you're not really like that, you know. Now that you're here in this context, that sometimes people have come to me and they've said, "Oh, Lama, in front of you, everyone's good." And I say, well, at least in front of me, they behave well, right? Because it's true that if I'm in front of someone, that I have a certain level of, how do you say? Fear is not the right word. Uh, if I have great respect for this person, then I need to then I need to really be careful. So it's better to be transparent and transparent and sincere, but it's good also to adapt to certain relationships. I have a certain amount of we're never an autonomous entity, autonomous from the relationships that we have. If we take each one of us and we were to make a kind of, if we were to describe the person at work or at home or with friends or in a religious context, I mean, are we the same? No. I remember, for example, people in a certain context, a friendly context, they were kind and light-hearted, and then they would go into that work context, and they have that label there, and it is a whole different a different story, rigid, formal, strict. Even with the same people, it just changed hats. Because what's interesting is that we interact and we transform not only with people, with the situations, with the places, but also with the concepts that we attribute ourselves. There was a study, for example, in a university of psychology, I don't remember where they did something that apparently seemed unimportant. Within the class they took, among all the students, they gave them names. They gave these students names, and there were actually titles. There was the general. I can't remember what the functions were. They gave them titles, actually. Without a specific function, that person didn't need to actually do anything based on that name. But they would take on that title. And what was crazy was that after just a short amount of time, these people started incorporating the characteristics of that role, just having the name. Because we relate to an identity. We relate to a concept. So if I need to be in a certain way, if I need to have certain characteristics, if I take on that identity, of course that's going to shape my way of being, of perceiving. And it's one of the craziest things from one point of view. Crazy. how much our mental, how much the mental image has tremendous power. What are mental images? These characteristics and functions that we attribute to something with a name. So we have a little small word, sounds that represents a concept. And there are two types of mental images, dachi and duchi. Dachi are mental images, and the philosophical term is not a mental image, but generalized meaning. So there are mental images from concepts that are verbalized and some concepts that are also lived. So if I tell you about something, for example, the other day or yesterday I was in Albagnano and I went walking in the woods and I went to see a place where there was a waterfall. It's really beautiful, actually. I went there. We were there with where the waterfall was. It wasn't that hot, but it wasn't that hot, but I went swimming anyway. I went under the waterfall, and the waterfall took away my glasses. I actually lost my glasses. I had to wear my backups. No, I made the joke in Albagnano we'll do a treasure hunt to find my glasses. So this waterfall is not too tall, about 6 meters tall. It's really beautiful in the woods. I mean, you can imagine it a little bit, can't you? That what you generated is a mental image of the waterfall based on words. The person who was actually there has a mental image based on a direct experience. My mental image, I have the memory of the temperature of the water, for example, right? The smells. It's different. Another thing that happens is I have that memory, but there were other people who were also, there are other people who have been there. And some people might say, oh, it's not really like that. It's like this, and with things that are not part of my memory. And that could, little by little, change my mental image. So the mental images, even the ones based on experience, they can be mixed with those that are based on verbal, on words. That's why our direct experience is trustworthy only to a certain point. I remember once there was a study. It was done for legal reasons, because when it was based on this researcher was interested to see how much we can actually trust eyewitnesses. Because if the judge says yes or no, if that depends on what his testimonial, then it needs to be trustworthy. So it was just a few years ago. They took people who had a very intense social media life, Facebook. So they would often put posts about their life, and they took maybe these 1,500 photos of of photos from a person's lifetime, and they took many, many people, more than 1,000, and they would show photos to these people, and they would ask them what happened here, and the person would talk about what had happened in that context. And but what the person didn't know is that among the 1,000 plus photos, um, then they were just showing one photo after the other. In the middle, they were actually putting in fake pictures, photographs with Photoshop. You know, people of that same period of time, but they modified and one of the and one photo that they used and one photo that was used a lot was that same person in a hot air balloon. And what is amazing that a very, very high percentage of people told the story about their experience in a hot air balloon that they had never been in. And of course, when there was an experience that was similar to what they had lived, then they're absolutely sure about that. So I trust my memory to a certain point. I live something and I have that perception, but after time goes by, I have the memory of what happened. There's the expectation of what I think should have happened. There's my imagination that says, oh, if it had been like this, and I start telling it to other people, and maybe I inflate it a little bit here and I deflate a little bit that, or I add a little bit more color, I take away a little bit of color. So as the years go by, that mental image that I have of that memory, is it the same as the one that I lived at the moment, or is it different? I've seen. For example, there are stories that I tell. I have to put effort I have to put effort into thinking. So I'm talking about something that someone told me. I didn't live this because it comes into our reality, and it's as if it's something that we ourselves lived. At the end of the day, what exists today of the past other than results? A vacation, for example, a vacation finishes, and what remains? Photographs, the credit card bills that you have to pay. Obviously, we remain, we have transformed, and we go on, but it's a memory. The photos are the memories, and the bills to pay, or the things that I did and how I lived it, and the results of those actions that go on. I met this person. I got sick here. I fought with this person. I mean, the actions don't just end. We bring our past with us in many, many ways. But if we look towards the past, what is it? It's just memory. I don't know among you if you've read or if you remember the book of George Orwell, 1984. There was the Minister of Lies. The Ministry of Lies. And the function of this ministry was to reconstruct the past constantly. So if the Big Brother said a month before that the price of coffee, I think it was the price of chocolate, would have increased, and then we got to that date, but actually the price is lower, they would take the newspapers of the previous month and they would change it. And they would rewrite it saying that that price was going to increase. They were constantly rewriting the past. This was the function that they had. But in our reality, it seems absurd to think in these terms. But do we rewrite our memory or not? Once we live something, it stays like that. No, we rewrite it. We try to see again. Because what we want an experience that is coherent between what we feel and what we live. We're looking for coherence. And this research for coherence, we transform our experiences, we manipulate our experiences, the memory that we have, and consequently the projection of what will happen, what we will live, and also what we're living in this present moment. So what happens is the mental image, these concepts, is that through which we experience everything. And someone might say, but if I can't trust my own memories, at this point, and this present moment, what we see, what we perceive, can we trust that or not? It depends on what you mean by trust. If trust means that what I see, what I perceive and feel is the reality, only an objective, independent reality, at that point we can't trust anything. Yesterday, I was talking to my sister about a movie that I saw some time ago, and The Last Duel in English. And it was a very, very nice movie. And one characteristics, a very nice characteristics of this movie is that it's the same story told 3 different times through 3 different people. And the first time you watch it and you think, oh, this happened and that happened. And then without expecting it, the story starts again from the beginning, but lived through a different person. You say, oh, it wasn't really like that. And then after the second time, a third person comes along and tells the story. There's a perspective, a third person. You say, okay. And at that point, you have a view that's a little bit more balanced. And you say, well, it's not like this, and it wasn't like that. But maybe it's not even like this. So your view is much more balanced. And it's the story of the first woman in Europe, in France, who suffered a rape, and she actually brought that to court. Took the man to court. So we see one perspective and we think that's reality. And we look for this certainty that things are like this. Instead, there are 1,000 different possibilities, an infinite number of possibilities. Even if there were only 10 different possibilities, let's open our minds to those 10. There are many, many more, but instead we stay trapped in our own view. And what happens is these mental images that we have of the past, for us, that is what happened. And even today, we act in the present moment, influenced by what happened in the past, and we direct ourselves based on what happened in the past. Because you did this, so this happened to me, and you said this. We do this, don't we? But what you said to me and what he did and what happened to me, are these objective realities, independent, autonomous, solid? Or are these subjective realities that little by little over time, that mental image transforms and adds up to so many others. And this, from this brings us to another point that really changed my life in so many ways. The idea that actually our past is impermanent. Someone might say, does the past change, or once it's happened, that's what happened? Theoretically, once that happened, that happened. It's not that I go, I pour the water into the vase and I just rewind it and the water goes back into my glass. No, what I did. I see it like this. So how is it that the past is impermanent? The past is impermanent. First of all, we need to understand what the past is to understand that it's impermanent. The definition in one philosophical text, when we study Buddhist philosophy, there's one chapter about three times, past, present, and future, and each one of the Tibetan the schools of philosophy, they have a different explanation. Some schools say that it's permanent, some say differently. But what I studied, and I liked, it says that the past are things that have already happened, the causes that have already given their fruit. The present, instead, they're causes that are manifesting their results, and then the future are causes, the causes that have already been created but that have not yet given fruit. So there's a part of the future that is there's part of our present that is also part of the future, but there's nothing that exists beyond what we impute as that's true. Let's say that and I've given this example many times. I really like it. Let's say I'm walking down the street in a big city like São Paulo, and someone pushes me from behind, from the side. I fall down and I break my arm. I like imagining an exposed fracture. It hurts, doesn't it? I imagine that it's really painful. And there I'm in the hospital with my arm that is hurting me so much. We didn't see who pushed us. What feeling do we have towards the person who pushed us? Attraction, aversion, indifference, gratitude. It's saying that we have aversion is not stating that you're a bad person. I mean, would you feel gratitude? No. So we feel aversion, and so we're there, and the police come, and they tell us that there's the film of a security camera, and maybe in our mind we're thinking, oh good, now we'll be able to see who it is. And maybe even before this, we're thinking, who was it? And there was a saying in Tibetan. It's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true. The one who steals, the one who steals does one negative karma, one negative action. The one who is robbed does 1,000 negative karmas, because the person who got robbed is thinking again and again, who was it and what am I going to do when I find this person, etc. So one is there with a broken arm thinking, well, who can it be? What did I do? Certainly just always imagined imagined who knows what, already sent messages. So at a certain point, the images from the security camera arrive, and the police actually say you were really lucky, and they show that on the other that behind the man there was an armed robbery, and someone actually shot a gun in our direction. Someone realized what was happening and pushed us down and saved our life instead of saved this man's life. And the police say if it weren't for this person, you probably wouldn't be here to talk about it. That bullet would have got you right, right in the, directly. I mean, the arm still hurts, but things have changed. Instead of being wronged, one's life was saved. The feelings that I have, I don't have aversion or hate. I have a feeling of gratitude towards the person who pushed me. But my arm still hurts. But what happened changed. So talking still about movies, I imagine that it's happened to everyone to see the same movie in two different times of your life, two different moments of your life. Maybe a film that you saw as a child, and then maybe after many years you see that movie again. I mean, this has happened to you, right? Do we live that experience in the same way? I remember seeing marvelous, beautiful films, and then after a while, I see them and go, oh, really? Or the opposite happens too. Actually, it's more the first than the second. What happened? What changed? The director go and actually change the scenes? No, we, the observer, we have changed. And as we said at the beginning, when there's interaction, one doesn't exist without the other. The image that we see on the screen, if there isn't someone to attribute a meaning to those images, what are those images? Just a bunch of lights and sounds. It's almost as if it's like if I talk to you now in Tibetan. I told you. But what came to you? Sounds or words? Just sounds. So what makes those lights and sounds a love story or a comedy or a criminal movie? Is it something objective or subjective, in your opinion? A comedy or the dramatic film, are they or do we attribute we are similar, and so we are similar and we attribute similar meaning. Mm-hmm. But what about jokes, for example? In different social contexts or cultural contexts, one joke can make a group that's similar laugh and make another group feel offended. So, but what we see is not just what's in front of us, but it's a reflection of our inner state of being, of our cultural context. It's a reflection of our state in that moment, what we're living in that moment. Everything's connected. And so the same movie seen in different moments. It's not the same movie because the observer is changed. But what happens if I see the movie at a certain time of my life and I have certain memory of the movie and then I don't see it for many years? In my way of perceiving, it's the movie that I saw is the one that I saw in the past, and then I see it again 20 years later, and now I have a new mental image of the movie. When something happens in our lives, when something happens to us, what lasts is that mental image of what happened. But we change day after day. We're constantly transforming. And if we were to relive that experience today, would we live it in the same way as we did 5, 10 years previous? No, we'd live it differently. And so when we allow ourselves to see the past with the eyes of the present, we change our past. And this has enormous power. Because, as we said before, one of the strange are the mental images is a very powerful tool. But we don't update these mental images. We keep them it's fixed. You did this to me. I suffered this. For example, the same situation lived as an adult or as a child is different, isn't it? Maybe, for example, at a certain age, maybe we lived an experience where we felt abandoned or not seen by our own parents. But today, looking at that situation with the eyes of an adult, do we see it in the same way? Or do we understand that in that moment, there were 1,000 other factors? For example, it makes me think about a person who had a problem for many years as if he had been abandoned by his own mother. And then years later was able to see that, understood that that mother had problems related to the birth of other siblings, and in that moment wasn't able to give the space and energy to this person. And so by understanding this, we can transform, we can change our past. So past is impermanent because changing our way of seeing the past, it actually changes reality. The emotions related change. Everything related to what we remember from that experience, that changes. Because we're constantly conditioned by our past, the mental images from our past, even our own identity. Right? Now, what about the present? Or this remote past? Is this the immediate past? I mean, what happened 10 minutes ago? Is that impermanent? Can I see it from different perspectives, or is it something solid and always is that? What I'm living in this present moment, is this the only way to live it, or can I live this present moment in different ways? Once someone asked to me, Lama, I understood that nothing exists independent. I understand that nothing exists for me independently from the value that I give to it. And what happens with this person, where this person was very full of anger. So, what happens in relation to this person who, and just naming that person made this person very, very angry. I mean, okay, I can say, look from a different point of view, but what this person actually did to me, that this happened. And so what's right? So we get into a kind of debate that, but there's a fundamental starting point here, which is, let's, let's take something that's easier to analyze. This object here, for example, what is this? It's a singing bowl, right? In a Tibetan singing bowl. Singing bowl in English. It, but what is this object? Can it be a bowl to give food to the dog? Can it be a can it be a pot? Can it be a weapon? Can it be a vase? Can it be used as a shield? I mean, how many different things can we use this thing for? Many things. But let's say that I determine that this object is a cake, a nut cake, walnut cake. I'm convinced that this is a cake. And we talk about it, and I say, you say it's a singing bowl, and I say it's a cake. What's the basis to understand who is right? First of all, we need to see that the name, the characteristics, and the functions that were attributed to it can or cannot be sustained by the object in question. So the question, can I eat this? I've never tried to eat metal, but I don't think that it's something we can eat. So you can eat a cake, so, and this you can't eat, so it's not a cake. But if I say, no, this is a singing bowl, and you say that it's a bowl to feed the dog, or we say that we can use it, we use it during the night to go to the bathroom. Let's say that I go home and I want my singing bowl for my practice, but instead I find it in someone's bedroom full of urine, and the next day maybe in the garden with dog food in it. We could be upset. No, this is my singing bowl. This is a sacred object. And what are you doing with it? How are you using it, etc., etc.? You could have a really heated argument about it. But who's right? The same object can or cannot, can it sustain it can sustain the characteristics and the functions of a singing bowl and also of a nighttime vase, or also the dog food bowl. I mean, so all three of us are right, but the question is, the question is, how convenient is it for us? I mean, what's the best choice? But we're giving it a meaning that can be upheld. But the question that comes up, which one is the most convenient? Which one works best for you? Because at the end of the day, there are thousands of different ways of seeing the same situation. But according to the value that we give and we relate in a different way, I transform myself in a different way. So what's best for me? Let's give it an example that's a little more subtle. Someone comes and acts aggressively towards us, uses ugly, violent words, etc., etc., towards us. Could be an object of anger, no? Or you act with aggression towards me, and I am hurt, and I react. I react. So we could say it's legitimate to feel that this person is an object of anger. What about an object of compassion, where I see an action guided by ignorance, selfishness, and I think, I'm sorry that you are acting in a way that's just increasing your suffering. So it becomes an object of compassion. What about an object of gratitude, like an opportunity to practice patience, for example? Yes. What about an object of neutrality and indifference? I can say, you know, I could be very stoic. What happens to me. I mean, I'm interested in what I'm able to, what depends on me, and I'm not interested in what doesn't depend on me. So one object can be an object of miserliness, like I'm not going to give this to you, or it can be an object of generosity or indifference. I mean, what determines whether that the person is an object of anger, compassion, or gratitude for practicing patience? The value that we ourselves give. But is it right to see that person as an object of anger? Yes. But also, it's right to see the person also, that object can be an object of compassion or of gratitude. So all of them are right, but what is the best way for me? What do I want to cultivate within? Because at the end of the day, the value that we attribute is the way that we interact with that person, that object, and it's also the path that I'm creating. So looking at the future that I want to create, what works best for me? And it's not a mental game here. Because if someone said it's a mental game, then we could say that life is a mental game. We're constantly projecting something here, projecting something there, putting things together. It comes to my mind, makes me think about my auntie of a friend in Brazil who she was quite the hypochondriac, and she was always calling the doctor. And every time she would read about a new sickness, she thought she was convinced she had those symptoms. And then one day she called her doctor and she said, "I have this, and I don't feel well." And the doctor would say, "No, only dogs have that sickness." Because she had read something and she had already created that reality for herself. And so what happens is, once a Hindu master said, life is like a movie, and we're our own directors, and we can choose if we want to live within a horror movie, a drama, or comedy. And someone would say, that's not true. You watch, look at the experiences that I've had, and you tell me how I can make that into a comedy. Of course, there are situations that are they're very difficult. Of course, if people treated us with violence and aggression, that it would be very difficult to not react to that. But in our present moment, there's a range where we're able to make a choice on how we're going to live these experiences. And that first fundamental step is understanding, accepting, and somehow digesting the fact that we live within a paradigm. It's not that we live in a reality that we interpret in a certain way. No, we live within our own paradigm. And what I see is a reflection of what I am. And so that thing exists according to the way I relate to it. I relate to that thing through that value that I give to it. So reality takes that shape. I'm not saying that I imagine something and then it exists and or it doesn't exist according to what you imagine. I'm talking about the fact that according to the value that we give, our reality manifests itself differently. And I'm not saying that external reality doesn't exist. It exists. But the way we live it depends completely on how we perceive it, the meaning that we give to it. There's a part of this that's very large that comes spontaneously. But there's another part, even if it's small, where we can reattribute meaning. We can see again, see it and give see it from a different perspective. It's possible. As we said before, wherever there's interaction, there's transformation. The stronger, the more intense, the more constant the interaction is, the greater the change in that direction, obviously, right? Among all the objects of our senses, we have 6 senses. What we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, what we smell, and then we have this sense of our mind. So the objects that we perceive and that sense of the mind, among all of these 6 senses, which is the one that we use the most, we interact the most with the sense of our mind. We're constantly using the sense of our mind. So the mental images, these mental images that we create transform and reshape us, even chemically. The choices that we make, the interactions that we create, they have an enormous, enormous influence. That's why it's also said that when someone has a kind of trauma, it's not that important to understand, go back and look at what happened. It's important to see how that person lived that experience, because what exists today is what I remember having lived, because that reality is not that objective. So let's do an exercise. Let's just set the past aside and let's bring ourselves to this present moment. And when we observe our lives in this present moment, there are situations that we're living. I'm not talking about this immediate past. Let's think about these past days. Economic situations, familiar situations, physical situations, situations at work, etc. Right? I'm sure that for each one of us, there'll be one or more things that comes out more strongly. Maybe something that's happening at home or at work, or even on a larger level, like society, like war, or something also maybe something physical that's happening to you. So now put that thing in front of you. Observe it for a moment. Take a deep breath, look at it again, and try to see if you have the openness. Allow yourself to look for, I don't mean right away to find, but look for different perspectives. the same thing. A perspective that can be as valid as the one that you currently have. That the way we're living that experience is not objective but subjective. And there are many other possibilities. And let's try to allow ourselves to open ourselves up to the idea that there are other possibilities. And we're not saying that our perspective is wrong, because if being open to another perspective means that we're negating the one that we see, we put ourselves on the defense. But are we open to seeing different points of view? And this answer needs to come from the gut, in front of that reality, and say, I'm ready to live this experience differently. Let's give an example. And we'll see just how difficult it is. It's not at all obvious. This object, for example, what is it? It's a bell. It's a bell. Do we all agree that it's a bell? Now, are we ready for a different point of view regarding this object? Let's say yes. Okay. Yeah, we're all open-minded. We want to see things differently. Okay. Now, from now on, this is a glass. It's a tantric glass. A cup. Are you able, can it sustain the functions of a cup? Once someone told me, but you can't leave it on the table. But I remember also in airports you see these cone-shaped cups so that you don't leave them just lying around. So it can be a cup. So what does Lama have in his hand? Is it a bell or is it a cup? Let's say it's a cup. It's difficult, isn't it? It's a cup that is being used as a cup, or as a cup. How do we see it? We see it as a bell that is being used as a cup. But in reality, what is it? Is it a cup? Is it a bell? Neither one nor the other. It's just the parts put together. And there's an enormous difference between seeing an object of anger as an object of compassion and seeing directly the object of compassion. There's an enormous difference between seeing an object of anger as an object that brings me the opportunity to practice patience, and seeing directly the object that gives me the opportunity to practice patience. Just like in the same way, there's a huge difference between seeing this object as a cup or seeing this as a bell that is being used as a cup. How can I transform it? How can I transform it into seeing it as a cup? And somehow I need to annihilate the image that I have of the bell. I need to understand that there is no bell in an objective, autonomous way. What exists is the value that I give to that thing. It can be many different things. It's as if we took something written. Here, for example. Maybe you're not able to see, but I'll read it to you. Kunpen, Lama Gangchen. The other two words. So here we have Kunpen, Lama Gangchen. Kupen. But if we look closely, this writing, Kunpen, actually, what is that? They're just lines to which we have attributed meaning. We have a straight line, and then another one that's a 45-degree angle up and one down, and we call that K. These are 3 lines. It's not a K. I remember once in Tibet, friends from the monastery of Tashi Lumpo, they asked me to teach them the alphabet, and I saw how difficult English is, where that I is the vowels don't correspond to the actual sounds. So I had to take things that were absolutely given and introduce them. It like if also if I were to show you Tibetan writing, they're just lines. But what they are, they're nothing other than parts put together and to which we then attribute a meaning. I don't know if this is clear. There's also the frustration of the artist, because there's sometimes the artist does something and it's obvious what it represents and shows to someone, and they say, "Ma, ma." I remember once I was talking to an art critic, and I asked him what the definition of art was, and he said, "Art is everything that you call art." That's quite vast, and we could spend hours talking about what art is, but what happens is it's the value that I attribute to it. It's the whole of the parts, like a banana taped to a wall. Is that art or not? It depends. The banana taped to a canvas, or maybe marble, with many different forms. Maybe even done by Michelangelo. So is it the person that determines whether it's art? It's not so obvious to define. If I go there, I take a stone and I take a piece of stone that was actually sculpted by water and wind. Why is that less? Is that considered less a piece of art than one that was actually sculpted by hand? What determines? Is it a characteristic that is intrinsic, or does it come from the observer? It's the observer, but it's the same for everything. When we see something, what appears to us are forms and colors, and those are not objective either. The colors, for example. There's a friend that I had a friend who did graphic work, and we always talk about the colors. And then after years, I understood that he was actually colorblind. He saw colors differently. And then I understood why he would put certain colors together. That, to me, from my subjective point of view, the colors didn't go well together. But when we see a color, for example, this image that's in the back, behind you, the Buddha, the standing Buddha. Once there was a 6-year-old girl here, and that image was actually behind me. It was the original. It was painted here by Ducho. And this child asked, "Sorry, I have a question. Who who's that lady with the blue helmet? And she's right. I never understood why Buddha has hair is refigured like this, and the way he's dressed looks more feminine in our culture. But if we look at the colors, for example, the the colors of Buddha's clothing, if we compare the colors of his clothing and the colors of the leaves, it's red and green. Are they similar or are they different? They're different, but depends on for whom. Because for a dog, those are similar colors. For a dog, red and green are two different shades of gray. Very similar between them, but we see it based on our own eye sense power. So what is color in the end? Just waves of light at certain frequencies that reflect on from the object that come to our eye, that our eye sense power then perceives. But my eyesight is different from yours, and vice versa. If I take off my glasses, I'm sure that there are certain things that I see that are not the same as others. I see things differently. Same thing with our hearing. So, but when we see something, in our opinion, what we're seeing is that's what is, or we understand that that's what we're seeing without philosophizing. If I say what's there, what's there I don't know, but I perceive this and I attribute this meaning. No, that's not how we work. But our spontaneous way, what I perceive with my senses is the reality, objective reality. So reality around us appears to us as being objective or being subjective? Objective. I mean, we're able to see this, right? So that person did this thing. Is that an objective or subjective reality? How do we live it? We live it as if we know that, I mean, it is actually subjective, but we live as if it were objective. This person did this thing. It's not that we say, oh, this person did different, this person did certain things, and from my perspective, it seemed to be this. No, this person did that thing. End of story. It's said that one of the first steps to develop wisdom that is able to see reality coherently is starting to actually see ignorance. If we start seeing ignorance, when we're able to perceive, when we're able to see how reality, even if it's subjective, appears to us as being objective, and how we relate to this subjective reality as if it were objective. Being able to do this is a huge, huge step forward. If we go back to that exercise as before, where when we ask ourselves if we're open to seeing something for a different point of view, or if we ask ourselves instead, is this what I perceive? Is it actually that? Is it objective? Is it subjective? It's not easy to say that it's subjective. I know that it's tiresome, but it's really important. If I say this is a bell because it's a bell, or because we have attributed the name bell to it. No, it's a bell. No. It's a bell because I have attributed that meaning to it. I know that it's a little bit difficult, because this could bring us to think that nothing exists. once talking about this, someone asked me, where is the line between positive and negative actions? A violent action is a violent action. Well, let's make a definition of positive and negative actions. Positive actions are actions that through their interactions, they bring mostly mid and long term and possibly also short term. They bring a result of well-being and happiness. Negative actions instead are those that through their interaction, mid and long term, bring a result of suffering. If I come and I use aggressive words towards you, or I'm physically aggressive towards you, and someone says, is it positive or negative? No, it depends. Everything's relative. No. Can it sustain these characteristics? These actions done with hate and aggression, can it sustain the concept of what is positive? No, in the same way that this is not a cake. So can it uphold those characteristics? A positive action, a negative action, it doesn't depend on that point of view. For me, it's positive because that's convenient for me. But mid and long term, does it bring happiness and well-being, or does it bring suffering? And here, normally, there's a great coherence. And let's not get into this nihilistic point of view where nothing exists. No. We're saying that we live in a subjective reality where there is a material reality, but even if this external reality exists, this external reality doesn't exist. It doesn't exist independently from our inner reality. Let's go back to our first point. If I see you and you see me, in this present moment, I'm existing in dependence on you and vice versa. Here we're all here together interacting. In this present moment, what we are now, do we exist independently from each other as we are? No. We are mutually dependent on each other to exist as we do in this present moment. We mutually dependent. And this, in certain scientific environments, the science has tried to analyze objects beyond the observer, trying to see what is there beyond the observer. And they've seen that it's not possible. It creates a lot of problems. So we want to analyze something scientifically, but who is looking at it? In what context? There are many aspects to consider. So we live in a subjective reality. Even ourselves, what I am is subjective. And we agree on this, don't we? We're in an interdependent reality where everything exists in relation to the interdependence of every other thing. If I'm with someone and I act in... We're two people, the two of us are talking and a third person arrives. We change, not because we're fake, but because every interaction is going to change. And the fourth person comes, the fifth person comes, and then there's more and more change. So we live a reality that is subjective, that is interdependent. The opposite of of interdependent is autonomous, independent. We live in a reality that is subjective and interdependent. The important key is understanding that when we perceive in every moment ourselves, others, situations, the objects that we interact with, for example, an object of anger or an object of desire, they appear to us as being an object of anger in a subjective manner, or because it's an object of anger, or end of story. How do we live it? When anger comes, are we there saying, oh, look at this object to which I attribute this meaning? Or it's an object of anger, end of story. I don't want to get angry. I don't like getting angry. It's the object's fault. An object of desire. I want it because I attribute a certain meaning, etc., etc., or because it's good. An object of jealousy, of envy, exists objectively as it appears. I mean, that's how we live it, right? And it's fundamental for us to perceive, not just conceptually, but to see that reality appears. Even the reality of ourselves, everything that we perceive appears to us as if it had an autonomous, objective existence, but it's not like that. Okay? And when we're able to see this, this brings us, this allows us to see our own emotions. Let's use the example of desire. I have an object of desire. Is there something that you've seen, and has it ever happened that you've seen something and you've said, oh, I want this? I remember once, many years ago, there was a store on the road between here and the highway on the way to get out of Milan, and I used to go there from time to time to buy computers, and I had become quite friendly with the owner. And it was the time where I had quite the passion for computers. Now that's past. And I had seen that a new model had just come out. And I thought, oh, I would love to have it. And I had all the reasons for wanting this computer. It was so nice. And I started saying, oh, how am I going to afford it? I started projecting my future. Maybe I can do this or do that. It would be so nice. And so I went to the store to see it, to talk about that new model. And I got there and I saw the man, our friend, and I said, what about this new model computer? He said, yeah, this is nice, but this is not a good aspect. This isn't working well. He said 3 things and I didn't want it anymore. Not because it changed. What changed was my perception. And what happens is, when there's an object of desire, attachment, or of anger, those emotions are upheld on the basis of the idea that this object exists autonomously, that it exists objectively, like this, as it appears to us. But look at this. Behind dissatisfaction, desire, attachment. For example, I have a lot or I have a little. What determines that? Is it objective or is it subjective? Or you don't dedicate enough time to me because you should give me more based on the amount of time you give to someone else, or what I think you should have. The worst is when we compare. We make a comparison based on our mental image, totally based on imagination, and we can make these comparisons. Well, what determines the value of something? Is it an intrinsic characteristic, or is the value attributed based on a comparison? Even the value of the material things, money or this singing bowl. I was in a situation that was really strange. For example, I found myself in this strange situation, and the jewels, for example, it seems very strange. It's if if you want something that's shiny, why don't you just wear lead bulbs lights? Why do you need a diamond? I've never it. I see it, and it doesn't do anything for me. One could see the light that refracts in the stone, but it doesn't do anything. And I find myself now with lots of jewels, and I'm not able to do anything with them. I learned that that the jewels they've given to me they've given them to me to do something, to help the center. But reselling jewels is much more difficult than it seems. And for me, the value is I'm not able to attribute a value to it. Maybe that's why I'm not able to sell them, because I don't give great value to them. And for me, it's a clear example. For one person, has an enormous value, and for another, not. What determines that? A cultural context, the value that one attributes to it, based on what one could have in economy. What determines the price is the supply and demand. I mean, how much do we want this thing? I remember that work of Banksy, that as they were auctioning it, and then it disintegrated. Is that worth more now, or is it? It's completely subjective. Look at money. That's just printed paper. I don't know if you've heard what happened in India maybe about 10 years ago. On a certain day, the Prime Minister Modi, it was the first year as Prime Minister. At the very beginning, one day at 8 o'clock in the evening, he declared that at midnight on that same day, all banknotes, let's say 20 euros and more, were no longer valid, and people could come to the bank and they could actually you could bring about 1,500, the value of 1,500 euros. You could deposit that into your bank account. But if you, after 1,500 euros, you needed to justify where you had gotten that money. There were literally rivers of money. Rivers of money in the roads. So there were cows eating huge banknotes of rupees. So he was able he was able with one move to he created a tremendous amount of chaos, but he was able with one move to get rid of all of the black money, let's say. And there were tourists there who were actually asking for money because nothing was working. It was absolutely chaotic, and the tourists couldn't use their money. So one day to the next, they say this has no longer the value that it had. Say this from one day to the next, it becomes worthless. But we give give value to reality, our objects of attachment, of satisfaction, dissatisfaction, resentment, etc., etc. And but when we see these emotions that are harmful to us, we live them as something solid, something real, something independent and objective, when instead they're not. And I'm not saying that it's all an illusion. No, reality is like this. And the beautiful thing is that when we're able to see that that situation that we talked about before does not exist as we live it or as we see it independently of the value that we ourselves attribute to it, it's not as we see it. And when we're able for a moment to deconstruct that idea of solidity, that opens up the door to see differently, to attribute a new, different meaning. There's a concept and that we can apply here as well, that when we do something and we realize that it's wrong, but we worked hard for it, it's even harder to accept our mistake. So we have this tendency to insist on doing something, even that we see something that's wrong, instead of just accepting or admitting that it was wrong. Like, and there are many examples of this, like the building of a parliament building was managed badly, but those in power were saying, "Oh, we've already spent this much money, so we should keep on with it," even though they've realized that it was the wrong project. It was being handled badly. So instead of stopping and doing it differently, they kept on with it. So we have this idea that the more sacrifice that we've put into something, the harder it is for us to admit that it's wrong. And we see this with relationships in couples. We see this in concepts in religion, many other things. When we think, "Oh, I've made so many sacrifices for this, I'm not going to give it up now." But what happens is, when we have our view about something, we say, "I suffered so much for this. I have so much resentment for that thing. I've had so many angry moments. Now you're going to tell me that it's subjective and it's not solid and it's not as it is?" No, because I just suffered in vain. It's not easy to accept, because when there's an object of anger or resentment, we don't want to change our perspective. We want the situation to be different. We want that person to be punished. We want that thing to change. When in reality, very often, we don't have that kind of power. But we can, in our interactions, try to go in a certain direction compared to another, which is fine. But when I change my perspective, I'm changing my reality. This depends on me. This I have in my hands. What kind of emotions do I want to cultivate? Sadness and fear, resentment and anger. A few days ago, or yesterday, someone asked me, "How can I face my fear?" And for me, there are three fundamental points. The first one that might seem strange is this certainty of the uncertainty. What what will happen? I don't know. Oh, but I, 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 I don't do this job anymore, and now I'm going to do this. How is it going to go? I don't know. Mm, Maybe it'll go this way, maybe it'll go that way, or maybe it'll go in a thousand other ways. So many things can happen. We saw with COVID, things that we never would have imagined actually happened. And things will happen that we have not yet thought of, for sure. So the certainty of the uncertainty, and we can relax. We can relax in the certainty of the uncertainty. I give myself a direction, and how it's going to go, I don't know. And if it goes badly, I will face that situation. If it goes well, good. If it goes badly, then at that point we take a different direction. Of course, we make decisions with as much awareness as possible. And secondly, we need to trust our resources and not on the situation, not the context around ourselves. So I know whether come what may, I can trust my own resources. The more we're able to trust and to trust in our own selves, the less fear we'll have. And the third point is often fear is an emotional memory of something more than an actual something that we're facing, and often has nothing to do with the present moment. It's almost as if I take this glass and I'm afraid of drinking this glass, which happened to me once actually. It was one Wednesday where I came here, and it was very slight, but I was afraid of drinking that water because the week before that, someone had put seawater in the glass just by accident. And here, certainly a few of you were here. It was really hot. Like today, I didn't say anything. I drank the water. It was incredibly salty. It was our Linda who had cirrhosis, and she brought water from the seaside, and just by coincidence, it was the same kind of water that we used here. And someone saw it in the cabinet and just used it to serve me water. And then the week later, they came to me and they said, "Lama, we checked. It's not seawater." And so conceptually, I knew it wasn't. But when I took the glass in my hand, I had a little bit of anxiety, like, is it really fresh water? I didn't just gulp it down. I sipped it. Okay, now I can drink it. This is a memory of something that we lived that doesn't have anything to do with what is actually happening. And very often we have these kinds of triggers. Things that trigger our past experiences. A short time ago, I heard about micro abandonments. What's a micro abandonment? For example, there are people who are very, very upset. Maybe they get really angry because the person near them maybe says that they're not going to come to lunch, or they come late. It's just by a few minutes, and they have the reaction is inflated compared to what's actually happened, because these people have these memories of being abandoned. And when these situations come out that are called these micro abandonments, that person those experiences trigger these past traumas, and that person lives that experience through the emotions of those past traumas. But even though in that moment that that is not happening. So it's really important to remember that our reactions in the present, we're projecting in the present something that is an emotional memory of something that happened in the past. We allow ourselves allow ourselves to accept that feeling without without reacting, and that means so much. So observe how our emotions are based on this concept, and these emotions that are harmful, they're based on a solid image of reality. What happened to me? What you did? What I need? What's coming? What's I'm going to live? Sometimes you hear people say, "I can't live like this forever." You can be sure that it's not going to stay like this. It's going to get better, or it's going to get worse, but it's not going to stay the same. I mean, we project to our future, and we suffer in the present by projecting into the future. So if we let go of this idea of solidity, and those emotions that are then connected to that become much more malleable. But it's something that needs to be repeated and re-seen again and again and again. Because we have this extremely deep conditioning to where we perceive reality in a solid and just in a solid and intrinsic way. I mean, just look at the people that we live with daily. I don't know if you've ever had this feeling that at a certain point that the people near to you, that they don't recognize you anymore. Because maybe you've been friends for many, many years, but at a certain point, that person keeps treating you as the person you were 20 years before, when instead you're not that person anymore, because we don't update our mental images, and we just stay there. I know you, of course, over time, and I think that I'm just still with that person that I met, but we're constantly changing. And it's beautiful to allow ourselves to update these mental images. So to recognize that after these 20 years, I see that you have changed, but I've changed too. And so we can also go back in time and relive situations differently. We allow ourselves to perceive this relativity, this interdependence, as something extremely important, but apply to our own emotions. A key is to look at how our destructive emotions are based on this idea, this mental image of a solid and a solid reality. And when we deconstruct that solid reality, also these negative emotions also fall apart. And it's hard to let go of that attachment we have. I'm not going to change my point of view about you. This I suffered so much for. I'm not going to let go of my resentment. Instead, let's do our part. I don't know if you're able to see this part where we don't want to accept something that's so clear, because what we've lived up to this point, it's really it's hard for us to accept that things are not in that way, and just to let go of that envy, jealousy, anger, when instead they continue to harm us. There's there's a passage in a beautiful text that says, it talks about allowing ourselves to be happy. There's a there's a phrase, that a sentence, a saying attributed to a philosopher. It's to Socrates, if I remember correctly. Happy is he. Happy is he or she who thinks he or she is. Because in our lives, if we look at our lives, are we lucky or not? You know, it depends on the point of view. We say we're lucky, but then we have a long list of complaints. Do we have a lot or do we have a little? Depends on our perspective. That's why we would see that these are not things that are so solid, and try to deconstruct them, to allow ourselves to see through a different point of view, see that it's malleable, it's not solid. And this allows us also to face difficult situations more lightly. This allows us to live the object of anger as an object of patience. It allows us to see the opportunity where before we saw a problem. Because when there's a conflict or a problem, often there's also an opportunity, isn't there? But we need to be able to see it. But to really see it, to take advantage of that opportunity, we need to let go. We need to let go of this attachment we have to let go of the feeling that it's a problem. Because if we take advantage of it, then we're saying almost as if we're happy that it happened like that. No, I mean, how can I direct this experience? I remember, and here we'll conclude. I remember that the day I left the life that I led in India and I came to Italy, and maybe I have nothing to hide, but it's not the time to get into the details. It wouldn't bring any benefit to anyone. It was a situation that was very difficult, and I was here in Italy, and in front of this, just to give a summary. Maybe people are thinking, "Oh gosh, what happened?" It was a situation of how do you say, a strong discrimination on the basis of nothing that I had done, but let's say on just from my group of and that's why I had to leave India, and then I finished my studies in Tibet. But the day I understood, okay, I'm not going to go back to India, to the monastery of Sera. The day I accepted that, I said, okay. I cried. I remember I cried all night. And at a certain point, I cried and I cried. And at a certain point, I looked at myself. And I was always had this habit of looking at myself, observing myself. And I thought, oh, I'm crying, but I'm not really feeling sad anymore. It was the impulse. And then almost like saying, how is it that I cannot feel sad for having to give up something that was so beautiful for me? I mean, I loved that. I love the life that I had. How is it possible that I can not feel bad about it? But actually, the situation that I was living was not unhappy. I was living a beautiful situation in many ways. I was with my master Lama Gangchen Rinpoche, so I was fine. And I take away take away the idea that things went differently from how I imagined them. I was fine, and I had this kind of click where I said, "Okay, I'm going to live the beautiful parts of this." It's like I'm walking, and I find myself in front of a wall, and I've been walking for kilometers, and looking at the map that I was following, there shouldn't be this wall, but the road is blocked here. First, I wanted to pull down the wall, and then I realized that I would have hurt myself and hurt others, and I wasn't able to keep walking without problems. So what I did is, before I was there crying in front of that wall, uh, the wall that I couldn't get over. But then I stopped and I turned to my right, I turned to my left. I said, there's another road that is just as beautiful. Let me follow this road, this road. It took time to digest it all, but then to continue joyously on my new road. But it's not easy to see opportunities in the moments of difficulty. You need also humbleness that allows us also to move on and to to not grasp at, oh, why is the grasping at the complaining and the disappointment. When I look in the past, when I look at the past, the biggest difficulties really turned out in my favor. I, I, and the key is allowing ourselves to see the wall, understanding that we don't want the wall, but then we can turn and see that there are other possibilities there, that there are other things that we can do and we can live well. So allow ourselves to open up our minds to other possibilities and to not stay blocked. To not stay blocked and thinking, oh, it needed to be like this, because the greatest obstacle that we have is this attachment we have to us, this mental image of how we think things should go. No, let it go. Okay. So here we see that the strongest object of interaction is our mental image, and luckily it's not that hard to direct and redirect it. We can change it. But for first thing, and here we conclude, let's remember that we need to train in seeing how reality, even if it's subjective, it appears to us as being objective and independent and autonomous, and how we relate in this way. A little bit like we need to live with our enemy to be able to get him. We need to be close to see, to watch him before we're able to catch him. We need to see our ignorance. How does our ignorance show up? See it closely. And then at a certain point, we'll say, it's so obvious. And we're able to see how our way of perceiving reality is, once we're able to see how ignorant it is, that once we start laughing about it, then we have a solid basis to construct the development of wisdom. Here we're talking about the wisdom of listening of emptiness, recognizing the object of negation. This is what we've been talking about. Because wisdom negates the existence of reality as it appears. But actually, we've said it all, but if you want to make it more complicated, that's possible too. Another day, we'll put it in other words. We need to deconstruct this way of 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 the way deconstruct the way reality appears as being solid. Our dedications now.
Drobe munsela tato ne gyurchi kewa kunto yanda lama dang dralme cheki pela longche chin sada lamge yente rabzo ne dorje change kopa nyurtoba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele kshin Nyensen takto delek pe koncho sumke chinge lo koncho sumke ngodrubo tsol koncho sumke tashi sho
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to obtain all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Tashidele. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.